6-story structure, you know, it might be able to hold more people, but looking at the elderly population, how long is it going to take Grandpa Joe to, you know, move his walker up 6 flights of stairs? So maybe putting in mixing parking structures or hotels with platforms. And we looked at putting a 6-story parking structure or hotel right behind the boardwalk. You know, if there's a lot of people on the beach, they could all easily get there. That would require some change in legislation, which would be difficult. And then the third round, we looked at along the eastern half of the city, just putting medium-sized berms or platforms every 4 blocks. So then that way you don't get one that fills up and other people, you know, have to move on to the next no room at the end situation. So and that's just creating basically a strip of structures. And if we made them high enough, they could still have views of the water, but they wouldn't need to be that high as they're out of the red zone.
Alrighty. Okay, we're going to move over to Catherine's table with the berms.
Alrighty. So I think in all 3 rounds we talked about berms as being a good, most cost-effective option, especially if you can make it a multi-use structure. We talked about ideas like using a berm as an amphitheater on top, maybe doing some kind of park or dog park possibly on top. I think the general strategy that all 3 rounds talked about was siting berms on the eastern edge of the city limit. Putting them closer to the beach might be able to capture more of the tourist population, but they would have to be so high that blocking views would become an issue and more expensive property would be an issue. So having kind of a network of like small to medium-sized berms back along the eastern edge of the city limits, but not too far back where you were getting into some of the lower drainage ditch areas. So putting them just right along the city limit edge. Let's see. We talked about a few specific spots. One, there's this annexation property to the north of town that could potentially be a spot. Let's see. Kind of this area between Bolstad and Sid Snyder where there's a big tourist population, kind of big commercial area, putting a series of berms back behind there. And then looking south down in Seaview, putting one maybe a little bit south of 101 on 40th. Let's see. So yeah, it really seemed like the 2 biggest issues that came out were the issue of blocking views and wanting to have them low enough that they didn't block views, and then thinking about these areas that are wetlands are good possible sites if the wetlands issue can be mitigated.
Okay, and we'll move over to Chris and parking structures and or hotels.
Okay, we were looking at some opportunities for some larger buildings in the Long Beach area, including the Seaview area. Part of the problems we were having is particularly in Seaview, where you've got a population that you want to serve, there may be some difficulties in terms of developing a hotel type structure because there's a general feeling of, you know, anti-development. So there may be some areas where a distributed approach where you might want to mound in certain places and buildings and others, and there are some interesting opportunities for development for larger buildings near Long Beach. And we, instead of looking at hotel type structures, they were looking at larger, perhaps public buildings that could include parking, public meeting space, other public uses, which would tend to draw people toward that building because it's a public building. People would know that it's for public use and would be attractive for that in that sense. Some of these areas are right that we identified were they're for the most part on the east side of the city, just as people looking at mounds saw. For similar reasons, you can get higher without blocking views. Land is cheaper. In many cases, the city already owns some of the land that could be redeveloped. So found a lot of, had some good ideas and talked about the need for a distributed approach in terms of different types of structures, including buildings.
Did you have any
Platforms.
other major issues or concerns that came up in the groups?
I think
Good.
one of the biggest things was costs, both of construction but also maintenance. If you're doing a hotel, you have to figure out who's going to be maintaining the public portion of the hotel, the evacuation structure. How can you build a building large enough to evacuate the people that you need and still make it economically feasible to keep that building up to date, or keep it maintained if, during off-season, low usage. So.
Okay. And Amanda, do you have a couple major concerns that came up?
I think the biggest, I guess I'll go over two big concerns, was that the platforms all tend to have stairs leading up to them, and we would need to calculate how much time it takes people to climb stairs, especially if you've, just ran in from the beach, or if you're a senior, how long that takes you, and then just looking at maybe some type of covered facility or like a domed facility on the platform, so that you've got some kind of shelter for the people that are up there.
All right. We will be sending out an email to all of the participants. Thanks again for coming. But there will be an email sent out to you to kind of evaluate this process, to give us some feedback. That will probably be sent out tomorrow. If you have anything that came up while you were doing this process that you could just let us in on little concerns or something that worked well, that would be really helpful. So that document will be sent out tomorrow.
If you haven't signed the sign-in sheet,
Yeah.
if you could do that, it's floating around
Yeah, it's
somewhere.
right here. Okay.
Do any of the participants have anything to say on what was, that we might have forgotten? Okay, we're going to be doing a report that's going to be sent to you before the next meeting. How many of you can realistically come here in 2 weeks, the 25th? Can you? If you can, it'll be much shorter. But we'll need a discussion, kind of a mixture of comments and concerns. So, be very good. Well, thank you very much.